we've got to help people reimagine what their behaviors look like in their homes and start to wrap our arms around and bring everyone along. Otherwise, we're going to start to see a bigger and bigger divide.
Kelly, it is great to have you here on the Learning Leaders Show. Welcome, man.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, let's go back to the year 2000, 23 years ago.
Oh, I had so much
And
hair.
uh, you're getting ready for the World Rafting Championships. And I loved reading about this. Can you take me back? You're in Chile. Can you take me back to that day? What happened and what you learned from it?
Oh boy, that's another lifetime ago. I was a professional whitewater paddler. So I paddled on the U.S. canoe and kayak team. So every 4 years, you see that in the Olympics where they hang the gates over the river. That was my main sport. But what we figured out was that there was a lot of money in extreme sports at the time, right? It's just this emergent. I mean, the word extreme is very hot. I mean, Mountain Dew is crushing at this point. And there was this thing that happened. There were these extreme races that would pop up, and my friends and I would get together because we were raft guides and kayak instructors to support ourselves through college and through our racing and sort of another sport. And we realized we could get together, go huck ourselves down these rivers and potentially make $200. Like people would die. I'm not making fun of that. It was very dangerous, but we were like, we can make $200. This is amazing. So we would all do that on the weekends. In Europe, this small boat racing down class 5 is very big. In the United States, it's not so big, but there's this thing that happened called the Camel Whitewater Challenge. So Camel South Africa, Camel Cigarettes, creates this gigantic world championship event. We win the national title, represent the men's team. We create sort of this hodgepodge group of boys. We go race in Chile on La Fu, which is like the biggest, gnarliest class 5 river in Patagonia. The sponsors' names are on the bottom of the boat. It's 7 days long. They fly in teams from all over the world. We go race. It's bananas. And that's where I meet my wife.
Mm. And you chose to open your book with that story. That's a really important important real estate of a book, right? It's like it's the hook. It's going to grab people. What made you choose that story to open it with?
I think there's a couple things here. One is that we recognized that in the story, basically, my life jacket's very loose, and we have a horrific wipeout, and we swim this bad class 5 river. And I'm bouncing on the bottom of the river, tightening up my life jacket. It's a little late in the game to tighten up my life jacket, but that's what's happening. And because we keep them loose, because it doesn't matter, right? We're the best, and nothing's going to happen to us because we're young and we're invincible and we're the best. And then the thing happens to us, and I'm under the water, trying not to float out of my life jacket, trying to save our paddles, save my wife, not my wife yet, paddles up to us. Her life jacket's tight. They make the move. They do the right thing. They scout ahead, right? They're the women and organize, and they rescue us all. That's sort of the story. But what we want to talk about there was one thing is all of our experiences born out of the lens of working in high performance environments. One of my favorite coaches is this guy named Frans Bosch. He's Dutch. And he says there's more variation in waltzing than there is in sprinting. And what he means by that is at low loads, low speeds, low cost, we can get away with a lot. And people can recognize this, that, man, if you're early and there's just a ton of revenue in the system, you can just make bad mistakes and your revenue covers all that. And at low loads, low speeds in sport, we really don't understand inputs and outputs very well. But suddenly when we're exposed to real competition, real speeds, real stress, real sort of where performance matters, we really start to see best practices start to aggregate. They start to mutually accommodate. And when we are at the Worlds, I'm a user there, but now fast forward a million years later, and I'm working alongside the best athletes, the best teams, the best organizations, from English national soccer team to All Blacks. I mean, we get to see everyone's dirty laundry, military, Fortune 500 companies, individual superstars. It turns out there are these first principles that we really have to start to respect if we are going to talk about going fast, right? Doing the things we want to do, being durable. People's livelihoods are on the line, their bodies are on the line. But one of the things that we've come to appreciate through this is that we either are going to treat sport like a laboratory where we're coming to understand inputs and outputs and what's essential about how to get the most out of ourselves, or let's treat sport as a circus where we're just entertained and we break the bodies of the athletes, we feed them to the lions afterwards. We can do that. That's fine. But our hypothesis has always been Formula One concept. The reason we have anti-lock brakes on cars is because they came out of racing. And so we want to take all these Formula One ideas that have been tested, validated, expanded upon, democratized, and say, hey, let's see if we can transform our families with that. And that's really sort of the lens of which we've always tried to operate. Here's what we know. We test and retest in these gnarly environments so that we can then transmute those lessons back. So one was make sure you're taking care of your business because the accident is coming. The durability challenge is coming your way.
Kelly, that you've spent a good portion of your life surrounded by the world's top performers in a wide variety of industries. So not just here in this particular sport, but in multiple sports, in Fortune 500 companies. So you've got to see excellence up close. You've also got to see mediocrity. So I'm curious if you had to distill that down and describe the difference between mediocrity or even good versus the excellent performers. What are some of those few things that the excellent performers seem to have in common?
One of the things that happens is that we confuse mutants working in mediocrity. They can tolerate a lot. The systems are really robust. That's not the same thing as excellence. If I took a sort of 30,000-foot view, I'd say excellence is performing at a high level for a long time. That means you actually have to be excellent, not just do your job mediocrely for a long time. Like you can't just be excellent by doing a fine job for a long time. But I think if we peel back there are three things that I think are sort of germane to that common. One is intense curiosity. We are really curious about the systems. We're curious about the experience. We're curious about the process, and we iterate every day. I'm sure there's a different way. I mean, the old idea of 3M, you have to come up with an innovation for your team once a month, once a week, whatever it is. The second thing I think is we see obsession. I think that's really useful. And that's not the same thing as intense curiosity. I'm just obsessed. It really helps to be obsessed with the thing that you're obsessed with, whatever that is. But it's a hallmark of, I think, really good people. They're just really, they're into it. And they're into the people who are into it. And they create a culture around it. And it's really infectious. And the third thing I think is probably lots of repetition. I don't think we get to iterate enough, practice enough. I'm a father of two daughters. I have a daughter who just graduated from high school, and I have a freshman. And we try to create as many opportunities for those women to compete as we ever could. And that might be ping pong in the backyard. That might be we're throwing rocks at a rock in the river and it's world champion of the world. That may be that they just do a lot of different sports and a lot of competitions and they give a lot of speeches. And we just want them to be really comfortable with, hey, I'm going to have to be great here in this moment, or I'm going to have to do my best in this moment. And it's okay to have this pressure of performance that's sort of lurking in the background. Because what my wife, who is a 3-time world champion, 2-time cancer survivor, stud of a CEO, she's a gamer and a baller. And when pressure comes, she becomes a diamond. I mean, I'm like, it's crazy to watch my wife like, oh, we're competing. She just becomes a different person. But she has been competing and racing her whole life. I mean, from she was a state champion rower in high school, all the way up rower in college. She's been competing a long time, and getting comfortable with that pressure of I'm going to risk something tomorrow, even if it's small. that makes for a much richer life. And I'm not talking about you have to be stressed out and flaming out and on the verge of burnout. I mean, there's going to be competitions and competitions, but when you show up at a friend's house, they're like, we're playing pickleball. You should be like, hell yeah, we're playing pickleball, and I'm going to kill you. Only through joy and recognizing game. But one of the things I think we consistently see in our family is we have a better family because we're more comfortable with a lot of risk and risk tolerance.
Hmm.
Juliet and I are asked sometimes about how are we comfortable taking risks in our business? How do we are basically created we're a content creator, a content category creator in this sort of mobility space. And we had gyms and businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But we were river guides for a long time. And to be a river guide means I have to meet a bunch of strangers. I have to get them organized and go down the river. And we have to do these class 5 things or class 4 things. I have to make you lunch. I have to go shop for lunch. It just the thousands of daily it wasn't like, which ice cream am I going to scoop for you? It was like we were 19 and 20 and responsible for way too many people with way too much danger. But we did it regularly, and that made us more comfortable with taking more risk. And so I think that is a feature of our family that's really fun. And you would find our family is entirely laid back and super fun until it's time to win.
How much of being intellectually curious, being obsessed, and being very competitive are you born with versus how much can you develop?
That's a really good question. What I'll say about myself is I'm a single child of a single working mother, and I had an absent father. And so I'm sure some of my coping mechanisms were to prove myself to my absent father, who happened to be like he's deceased now, but he was like the great Santini. He was like college quarterback, F4 pilot. I mean, he was crazy, alcoholic. And so part of I'm sure I was always doing was trying to prove myself to my dad. I'm sure that's part of it. Sorry, everyone, we had to go there. But
Life.
That's right. But I think that people have more tolerance, less tolerance for risk, but there's a lot of things that make that more stable construct. Are you sleeping? Do you have intense relationships? What happens when you fall apart? How do you confront losing? Because look, I'm arrogant enough in everyone roll your eyes, please. But I don't mind getting beat. I hate losing. Losing for me is my fault. Wasn't prepared, got my ass kicked, could have done more work, tactical errors, whatever. That's on me. But you're so good, you destroy me. I'm like, high five, I'm coming for you later. I mean, like, that's really cool. I don't mind getting destroyed. I hate losing. And losing, I really feel like is really, again, on me, not getting beat. What I'll say is, I think we forget that we can create a lot more readiness for people to tolerate that if we look at some of these basics. I think our brains, here's a metaphor. When you are stressed, under-rested, fueled by alcohol, undernourished, don't feel like you have meaningful relationships, your body becomes very twitchy, and your brain will start to perceive insult to your body as, hey, you got pain. This is achiness. It'll shut your force production down. Here's an example. There's a documentary about this French freediver, and he discovers that if he's going to win the world championships in freediving, he can't have any fighting with his wife. He can't have any arguments with his family. If he does that, it affects his CO2 tolerance and his brain's ability to suffer during this free dive. He is so sensitive to this. And don't get me wrong, this is very sensitive, very specialization, but that when he feels unhappy at home, he sees this direct correlation to how he performs. So oftentimes we're thinking about the mindset always, and we're not thinking about the body that carries that mindset. And what we find is that people who move, who sleep, who get all those things, they tend to be able to handle greater strain and greater stress. Simultaneously, I regularly see athletes. I'm working with a local university, for example, and we have women there who have never lost until they lose for the first time against big rival university. And how they handle defeat how they handle getting beat, how they handle losing. That is a learned skill along the way. And if you only have been passed along because it was easy for you, always selected for the best teams, always got the right job, and then all of a sudden that doesn't work for you, you don't have a strategy or a tactic to understand and be intensely curious, and for your ego to come out in that and say, that's okay, that's not going to happen to me again. And so I think it's simultaneously, sure, we can set the dials, but I mean, come on, we can teach a lot of these skills to people. We're talking about sleeping, we're talking about eating, we're talking about practicing winning and losing and being meta about it, right?
Yeah, I think
I've never talked about this before. I love this. This is so great.
Okay, good. You use a phrase rewild.
Mm.
What does it mean to rewild the body?
Look, 10,000 years of human evolution, you're the same. We have not changed at all in 10,000 years. I mean, maybe you can see the color blue. Maybe that's the difference, right? Our guts are a little different. My femur is a little longer. You're a little fatter, or vice versa, depending. But really, it's the same body in 10,000 years. And what we've seen radically is big shifts between human and environment. The kinds of things we do, the kinds of stimulus. And so let me be careful here. I don't want to say that we should be pining for the Paleolithic time, like a more sensitive time where we were around the fire, worried about disease. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying our bodies evolved in a certain way in the behaviors around us. Here's an example. Your lymphatic system is the sewage system of your body that handles all of the broken down cells, all the waste products, all the proteins that can't go into your circulatory system. So you have your circulatory, your veins and arteries, heart, all that stuff. But you have this parallel sewage system, and your body makes about a gallon of sewage a day that gets reprocessed, et cetera, et cetera. All of that sewage system is bootstrapped and coupled to your movement system. And that means a muscle contraction pumps the sewage out. And there's a reason why walking is tied in deeply to your sewage system, because humans did a lot of moving. We used to get up and down off the ground. We had to work. We sat. We had to get firewood. We gardened. We did all the things. And suddenly what we're seeing is, hey, we're having a sewage backup system problem because we don't move enough. And this is the least reason, like interesting reason to go move more. But it turns out a lot of our fundamental biologic process is being subverted for no fault of our own by hints and shaping by the environment. So when we say rewild, what we're talking about is let's reclaim through simple behavioral interventions, foundational physiology. How do we give your body back its native capacities? How do we get your behaviors out of the way of what your body is trying to do? We have this phenomenon where a lot of the athletes we work with go through a surgery, have a trauma, injury, right? And then their doctors are like, you healed so fast. And I just say, stop for a second. You either heal at the rate of a human being or you heal slower than that natural rate. There's no one who is a fast healer, but there are absolutely things we can do, making sure you're getting enough sleep, making sure you're hydrated, loading the tissues appropriately, decongesting them, right? The psychology of the thing, where suddenly what someone's recovery looks supernatural in their ability to outstrip and outpace someone who isn't doing those basic things. And all we're doing is enhancing the behaviors that allow the physiology to work at its maximum level. And I suspect we put up recently a post where I suggested, how dare I, that people should get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. That's what I said. And I think we're about 3 million views. We ended up pinning it because we're just watching the comments roll in, and the hateful comments towards me about my body, my hat, my face, like, how dare I, I'm a bozo, because I suggested that people get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Well, guess what? The data is more significant than your feelings, people. And you cannot find a piece of research. You can't find a big institution. You can't find a world champion group that's like, yeah, 6 hours of sleep is fine. 5 hours of sleep, 4 hours of sleep. There'll be times when that happens. But this is a good example where culturally, we've told people the hustle, sleep when you're dead. But what we're finding is that doesn't comport with what we know about learning or body composition change or healing or how your hormones work. And what's been really interesting is that a lot of the comments here in this talk, again, about sleeping 7 or 8 hours, not 9 hours, 7 or 8 hours, especially where I'm chronic pain, the comments are you're sleep shaming people, how you're creating too much pressure to sleep and you're going to ruin the sleep. So we can't even talk about we're talking about something as fundamental as sleeping 7 hours. And that is sensitizing people to less sleep and shaming them. And I'm just saying, hey, that's what I'm talking about rewilding. We want to come up with benchmarks and vital signs that allow people to make decisions. Well, there'll be times where I'm way below it because I have a deadline or a red eye or a family emergency or something going on. And then I say, hey, I really need to prioritize this again. And that's what we're talking about. How do we restore, whether it's range of motion or tissue tolerance, how do we restore the native abilities of this incredible machine?
There's tests to do, and this one's pretty basic, but I wonder if people, after hearing you, ask you to share it, then maybe they'll pause the podcast and they could try it. But simply the sit and rise test. What is the sit and rise test?
We started the book with this vital sign of getting up and down off the ground without using your hands. So here it is. Stand up, cross your legs, and then lower yourself to the ground without putting a knee down or a hand down. Don't fall, just lower yourself down. Then, without putting a hand down or knee down, stand back up. You can't tell me you haven't done it. You've done it 10,000, you've probably done it a million times from when you were a kid onwards. Right? Did you go to kindergarten? You sat crisscross applesauce and stood up off the ground. Like I guarantee you. The reason we put this in as the first test is it's the first time for a lot of us that we might be confronted with how our range of motion has changed, how our ability to express and access our physiology actually causes us not to be able to do something effortlessly. And this test, by the way, does not require Simone Biles level of hip range of motion. In fact, it's very, very fair that you can put your leg into this kind of cross-legged, externally rotated shape. You're just sitting crisscross on the ground. People struggle with that alone. Again, very mid-range. You don't need ankle range of motion. You don't need a lot of leg flexion. It can't be about strength. Are you telling me you're not strong enough to get up and down off the ground as a human? We're like, really? Like, then we are really in trouble. But what we find is, and I've been trying the work of my family, we wrote Becoming a Supple Leopard over 10 years ago, which was really a unified field theory about complex movement behavior, human movement behavior. And I've been really trying to make the case for range of motion and performance for over a decade now, and people still don't get it. I still haven't done a good job of explaining it. So suddenly, what we're trying to show people is that when you lose access to your physiology, you lose, in this case, simple range of motion, you start to lose choices. You start to lose solutions. You start to lose options. And now your window or your hallway of potential movement solutions and strategies starts to become a little narrower. And what happens if you don't keep an eye on it? Well, then all of a sudden you don't have any hip range of motion and you can't do your sport. You can't play with your kids. It turns out that the number one reason, I learned this in physical therapy school a long time ago, the number one reason people end up in nursing homes, can't get up and down off the ground independently. So the real magic in all of these things, of course, we can go into the weeds on all of these things, but the real salt is how is a busy person going to work on their hip range of motion? Where are they going to practice this? What are they going to take away? What thing are you going to pull out of a busy executive's life? No, I'm going to have you, ma'am, I need you to get on the floor during the work. That's never going to happen. Stop that. Quit that. That's crazy. No serious person is going to be bouncing on a bouncy ball in a board meeting. That's not going to happen. So what we realized here, of course, is everything has to run through this filter of when and where are we going to do this? How are we going to expose people to this? Well, it turns out most people are watching between 1 and 3 hours of television a night. And so one of the things we've figured out through our clinical experience is that, wow, we have this book-ended sort of aspect of our day. And if we can get people to just sit on the floor watching TV for 30 minutes, you start to expose yourself to all these hip range of motion, tissue range of motion. You start to fidget and you have to kneel, and then you sit side saddle, and then your legs are out in front of you, and then you're 90-90, and then you squat. And all of a sudden, we've got a whole bunch more movement language. Instead of using 3 words, now we've added another dozen words to your movement possibilities. And you're doing it while you're doing something else, while you're answering emails, while you're messing around on TikTok, whatever executives do, right? Unless you're in Montana. And so the idea here is first order business to get better at this thing, to restore your capacity, rewild, is to ask when you're going to do it, and to make sure that we've created opportunities for exposure, so that we're not saying, hey, I need you to go to this hip range of motion class or this drive yourself to the stretching lab. That's not going to work. That doesn't work. It's not consistent enough. So really the magic is, how do we begin to weave in these essential behaviors into a busy person's life who has 3 kids, working 2 jobs, has a side hustle, still wants to exercise? I don't want to give that person another listicle. I want to show them where they have control and agency, where they can start to get multiple things done at the same time.
How does this relate? A big phrase that came out, especially for those who follow football, is pliability from Tom Brady, right? He played till he was 100 years old, and he said it's all about pliability. Him and his trainer, they're doing these stretches, and he still lifted some weights, but you could tell it was very lightweight. He wasn't really about having like a ripped body. It was about being pliable. How does this relate to what he has done for his career?
Love that. So I'm not sure their definition of pliable. And if you read TB12 and you go to the back of the book and you actually look at like the 10 non-negotiables or their list of things, it's like, you got to drink water. You got to eat whole foods. You got to walk. It's the most reasonable list. What we're trying to do with Built to Move is take exercise and start to view it as an extracurricular activity. The fitness industrial complex is a near $1 trillion a year industry. It's a big industry. And yet when we have third-party validation and we just start to say, well, how's our $1 trillion experiment in fitness, wellness, health, entertainment? Because it's really become an entertainment industry. Watching The Rock do squats it's entertainment. Mm-hmm. We look at obesity, diabetes. We look at chronic pain, surgeries, injuries, ACLs, kids, elderly people, substance abuse, loneliness, isolation. Just ask, how's it going? And show me a point where you're like, we're killing it. We're not. So I take your system and I run it through my third-party analysis, my objective measurements, and not a single one of them is trending in the right direction, which means maybe people if I ask someone, is diet and exercise important? Do you think they say, no, of course it's crap. Have we not gotten the message? We're spending $1 trillion on weightlifting technology and weights, and you can buy kettlebells at Target. So what's going on here? What's going on here is something I think that Brady figured out, that he didn't need to be stronger. He needed to have access to his range of motion. He needed to feel like he could downregulate. He needed to focus on quality tissues. And I just want to be clear with everyone, that guy works very hard. He's very fit. But he isn't training like a 23-year-old bodybuilder. Mm-hmm. And I think what's most important about this conversation about accessing your range of motion and having movement choice, which is really one of the things he realized that he needed to do, not just become stiffer and stronger and springier, but let's go ahead and maintain our choices, is that we have fetishized gym culture and bodybuilding culture and said that this is what fitness and durability looks like. And you take your shirt off on Instagram and you're like, you must be fit. You have abs. And that has nothing to do with what we're doing. If you go into the track and field, if you go into some of our classic training halls, what you'll see is that people are training not for aesthetics and this sort of Instagram body. They're training for functionality, and they're not training for the training that we're doing should make the thing we're training for better. But what we've done is fetishized and created this whole weird thing in the gym where, hey, I'm on the Peloton and I'm bleeding through my eyes, and Jess King is giving me affirmations, and that's super cool. That is not a complete practice that will prepare me to be durable, to be able to take the hits. Right? I'm doing an entertainment. And as soon as we just take that and we say, hey, let's think about that as leisure activity, or let's think about that as entertainment. Suddenly you're like, cool. You go to Zumba or spin class as entertainment. That's a great use of entertainment, right? But over here, that has nothing to do with do your shoulders work the way they need to work, and how are we measuring inputs and outputs? Because we've been running this experiment for over a decade in global industrialized fitness, and it's not serving us.
Let's take that very busy executive you mentioned earlier, and they go, Kelly, I love where you're headed here. I'm going to read Built to Move. I think it's useful, but I want to implement something right now. Like these are the go-getters, the people who just like they make decisions and stuff happens, right?
Yeah, you got to start today for sure.
Right. Okay. So they want to implement. What are the first few things? Let's assume the person is one of those who kind of works out every once in a while and eats good about 45% of the time, but when dessert comes out, they're still having it, and they're not like fully like on top of the diet, and they've noticed that they've kind of let themselves go a little bit over the years because they're getting older. That's what happens to a lot of people.
Is that what happens? I'm 50. I don't think so.
What?
I'm 50. I'm not sure.
What does happen to a lot of people though, if they're not
so reasonable. This is so reasonable.
Right. If they're not intentional like you are, like I like to think I try to be you. I mean, I'm a 7-day-a-week guy because it's more mental than physical for me.
That's right.
And
that's why
so
you're not in jail.
I go crazy if I don't. But in a way which can work. But for that person, right, who doesn't have that mental circuit missing in their head like I do, what do you say to them to say, hey, let's start with these few things to get you on the right path?
Let's these first principle pieces, let's say that when you have enough time to get to the gym or go to a class, that's heroic. Let's protect that. Let's not eat into that and do that. I think that's where our mistake is. We basically come into complex environments and we're like, here's my secret scroll program. Throw away all the things that you're doing, right? So underneath that, what are these things that are going to make the biggest difference? When we talk about nutrition, because we threw a lot of words out of there we didn't define very well. I'm on top of my diet. Which diet? Can you show me? Can you quantify any aspect of that? I eat clean. What does that mean? What are you eating?
Right.
So here's this. We'll start with nutrition. Our principles of nutrition want to accept any style of eating. Your secret squirrel's personal identity is valid for me. It's cool. You eat beans in your culture. Let's go ahead and make sure those are on the table. So we have two principles that really wrap our arms around anything. Your keto, your carnivore, whatever. Ultimately, the reason we're having conversations about diet, not the diet, like what I'm eating, nutrition,
right,
is that people want to lose weight. That is the number one reason. How many times have people come to me and said, Kelly, I'm a busy executive and I think I could perform better in the boardroom and make better decisions if my nutrition is on point. No one says that. They're like, I feel gross. I don't want to feel gross. Help me. What's the shortcut to being less gross? So what we do is we throw out all of the restrictions. What we say instead is, let's make sure we do these things. And when we do these two things particularly, we'll find out that a lot of noise gets dialed out. We get a lot of improved performance. The first one is eating enough protein. And by the way, everyone, be prepared. You're going to get a lot of calorie control built into this. But we want from 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound body weight. And look, if you're really, really heavy, okay, let's get your protein at the level where your ideal body weight is. So if you're 300 pounds and you want to be 225, let's go ahead and try to get 0.7 to 1 grams of protein. But what we find is that most people are under eating protein and they're underreporting how much protein they're eating. So when we make them actually start to track and be aware of it, they suddenly are like, oh my God, I didn't eat any protein today, or I had very little protein today. That protein, I'm not talking about your muscles. I'm talking about your connective tissue, your organs, your gut lining, and protein is very filling. So you have to eat all this protein. You're like, well, I guess I won't have 4 donuts because I'm stuffed from this protein. So number one, hit your protein. And if you're injured or over 50, I need you to get closer to 1 gram per pound body weight. And that's actually a really reasonable number, 0.7 to 1 gram. Days where I'm on the airplane, not moving around, I'm like 0.7 is fine, right? Days where I'm smashing myself, going, it's going to be a little bit higher. Okay. What's important about that is when we start to put this first framework in, it cleans up a lot of other decisions. So let me give you a story. I also don't want to be gross. I'm 50 years old. My body's part of my job, but I just don't want my wife to think I'm disgusting. So intermittent fasting comes around and I'm like, this is cool. It's calorie restriction for adults. That's what intermittent fasting is. And we see a lot of executives who are going fast in the morning aren't really hungry. And so they can have a coffee and go to noon. And that's super cool. Calorie control. The research, everyone, is that, and this came out of UCSF, that people who engage in intermittent fasting lose muscle mass because they're not eating enough protein. So one of the things I discovered when I did intermittent fasting for myself, again, just an N of one, was that when my window of eating came, I was behind my total calories. So I couldn't eat these huge meals because I'd feel sick and sleepy. So I'd eat my normal size meal. I would suck at my training. My training sucked. Then I'd be undercaloried by about 10 o'clock and I'd eat like a whole chicken and a jar of peanut butter and 5 cookies. And I'd be like, okay, that was great. I got all my calories in. And then I'd go to bed on this enormous belly of food and sleep like ass. And then I'd wake up again and be like, hey, I'm not hungry. Let me just do this again. And after 3 or 4 days, I was like, this isn't working for me. So if you are into intermittent fasting, cool. Show me you can get enough protein. And what we find is, we start adding a protein in for breakfast. And that ends up being, hey, that doesn't blow the calories. I still can get leaner, but I can make this minimum. So now what we've done is said, hey, I don't really care if you want to do this with vegetarian proteins or vegan proteins, or you're a ribeye guy. Just show me you can hit this consistently. And we'll use that as a vital sign benchmark. The second thing around nutrition, which I think is crucial, is that we don't see people eat fruits and vegetables anymore. We have demonized the banana, right? It's got too much sugar. I want everyone to understand that a pound of cherries, it's cherry season, a pound of cherries is 230 calories. A single cookie from Starbucks is like 380 calories. And don't get me wrong, I'll smash the crap out of that cookie. But I'm telling you, if I'm asking you to eat a 1.7 pounds of melon, that's so much melon. That's 280 calories. That is 0 calories on the whole thing. And I'm going to keep saying, sorry, you have to keep eating. You have to keep eating. You have to keep eating. You're going to be stuffed. So what we've done is we borrowed this thing from our friend, E.C. Sinkowski at Optimized Me Nutrition. She has this thing called the 800-gram challenge. And what she does is she encourages people to get 800 grams of fruits and vegetables every day. If you do it with kale, you're going to be sad. Don't do it with kale. If you want to do it with potatoes and beans and fruit and berries, and suddenly I'm opening up the things that you can eat. So we're going to a business dinner. You get a steak, you get a piece of fish, you get 3 vegetables. You're not eating like you're an alien. You're not bringing your chicken breast and worried about, like, you're like, yeah, let's order the mushrooms. Let's order the Brussels sprouts. Let's do that. You're stuffing yourself because you haven't hit your 800 grams today. So suddenly, if I make it about micronutrients and fiber and protein, and I rinse, wash, repeat, not only is that the basis for all the world champions that we work with, all of the elite soccer teams, Premier Soccer, this is how they eat. They crush protein and they crush fruits and vegetables. Then they fuel with rice, they fuel with potatoes, they can add more carbohydrates they need. But I've got calorie control built in there, but I've also given you something that is it has an objective measure. And that objective measure is, I need you to eat more. I need you to eat more often. If you'd say, I can't eat 1.7 pounds of fruits and vegetables, that's 4 big apples. So you put on your big boy shorts, cut up 4 big apples, take them to work. And then you're like, oh, I'll eat that tangerine. I'll eat that banana. And look what we've done. What I've done is I made you eat so much food that you're probably not going to reach for the bagel, the cookie, the snack. And what I've got is some calorie control. I'm looking to stack these behaviors. So that number one thing begins to radically shape, because then you're starting to realize we're living in abundance, and there's so many ways to do that. You don't have to have a diet salad, but if you're not hitting your protein and micros, right, you're not hitting those fruits and veggies, you're going to see that we have a hard time understanding what's what. The second thing is I need you to walk 8,000 steps a day. That's minimum. And it's useful to have a tracker. That's useful, but your phone already has a tracker built in. What I want you to understand is that your brain and body will not work the way they're supposed to if you're only moving 2,000 to 3,000 steps a day, which is what the average person is doing. If you want to improve sleep pressure so you fall asleep, you got to walk more. You want to get some sunlight, you got to go walk more. If I could give everyone in your company a pill, one pill that reduces all-cause mortality by 51% and reduces all morbidity, would you give everyone that pill? Yes, you would mandate that pill, because I just took 50% of the death and problems off the table. That's walking 8,000 steps. That's how powerful that is. So suddenly we start to think, well, if I just remove some of the trash cans, or I make people walk to move their trash, if I say, hey, let's make sure that if you have a problem in the office, I want you to walk to the person's desk, then call them, then email them third. Suddenly we can begin to shape our environments to get all of that movement. I just have to park a little bit further away. I'm just going to take the stairs. I'm going to be like, hey, hon, we just finished dinner. Let's go walk for 10 minutes. And let's see if we can just catch up, leave our phones at home. And suddenly, one of the reasons we love this 8,000 is we get the lion's share of the benefits, but it's pretty reasonable goal to hit. A busy person can hit 8,000 steps. Notice it's not 10, it's not 12, it's not 15. But some of the early research is coming out that people who do not struggle with weight control walk more. They move more. And people who do struggle with weight control, even though they're dieting and exercising, aren't moving enough. So if I gave you 3 or 4 brutal Peloton workouts a week, and I said, I want you to hit 10,000 steps 7 days a week, guess which one burns more calories? 10,000 steps every single time. So if I'm looking at getting you to burn more calories, be less gross, have your brain work better, all those things, turns out those 2 interventions are very powerful. Now let's talk about the third intervention. And again, I'm just going to go 3 because the average person can't handle more than 3 things. I need you to get 7 hours of sleep as your minimum. How's that? And if you're triggered by that, grow up, stop it. You need to get 7 hours of sleep, and you may have to train your body to get 7 hours of sleep. Now, here's what's great about taking these behaviors and using them as sort of core values is that the valences around them start to create and aggregate behaviors around them. So if you are going to try to get 7 hours of sleep, but you're smashing caffeine at 3 or 4 o'clock, that caffeine is going to affect your sleep. So suddenly you start making different decisions about your caffeine intake. And we really try to help people who are struggling to get 7 hours of sleep to, wait for it, stop drinking at noon. You got to stop the caffeine earlier. That means you may need some other strategies. You have to go walk to wake yourself up, because I know 4 o'clock, you're like, dude, I could use a bump right now. And that caffeine bump is really powerful. But since you've been smashing coffee all day long, Adderall too, I know who you are out there. This is your jam. All of a sudden you get to the evening and you cannot hit the brakes. And so you have bourbon, you have Ambien. And so do not talk to me about the quality of your sleep. I need you to start to understand you're on this horrific depressant stimulant cycle that we sold you that was part of the game of survival when you were a young MBA. But now we have to start sorting out. I work with a lot of elite military groups. The only thing that has been proven in my tier 1 military groups to improve sleep is not drinking alcohol. All of the other behaviors, all the technique, all the everything, drugs, interventions, the only thing that is proven to improve sleep and raise testosterone is, wait for it, not drinking. So suddenly, I'm not saying don't drink. I'm saying, hey, if you're under stress or we're trying to get more like work done, let's only drink when it's a party. Let's only drink when we're celebrating. And then we'll be aware that when it's time to drink, it's going to be the best tequila we can afford. It's going to be the best old fashioned we can have. We're going to drink, and we know it's going to trash our sleep, but we're in a rested situation. So we're not saying don't be aliens here. We're just saying, let's cover the basics. You may need to be in bed for 8 hours to sleep 7 hours, because as an adult, you'll get up to pee. You hear your cat cry, your baby, whatever it is. You'll wake up and turn over because you're too hot. You got to be in bed for 8 hours to get 7 hours of sleep. Let's start there. Those are minimums. 8,000 protein, fruits and vegetables, walking. If you give me 3 weeks of those 3 things, your friends and family are going to come up to you and say, what drugs are you taking? You're on Ozempic. This is crap. What are you doing? I want what you have. And all you did was rewild basic native behaviors. I'll
Wow.
stop talking now.
I love it. Okay, so let's think about a couple more. To me, one of the things I enjoy doing early in the morning is hydrating and stretching.
Cool.
And I've started to get a little bit better with the breathing stuff. James Nestor, my dad was telling me all
Yeah.
the stuff about his
So
book, and
good.
been thinking about that. I've tested meditation apps. I'm not there yet. Can you go a little bit deeper into stretching, breathing, hydration, how that
Yeah.
plays a role with your body, and how it makes us a more functioning, optimized person, so that we can be a better leader when everybody else is awake?
This is really the key to all of this. So, one of the phrases I think is useful is we have this idea called session cost. Is that if we do a hard session, hard training session, hard game, what is the impact on my physiology the next day, my readiness? And we can measure that through heart rate variability, resting heart rate, central nervous system, arousal, all the things, force production, wattage. I can just see, I'm like, your CO2 tolerance, all of those things can be tracked. So, really, what I'm trying to do with all of my behaviors is reduce session cost. So, we say recovery. I'm like, it's not recovery. You cannot recover. We're trying to adapt better to the stress. But when we engage in the things that I just talked about, which are my foundations for elite performance, and elite performance can be brain or body, brain doesn't know, it's the same. What we end up doing is reduce the session costs from the stress of our life. That means suddenly that you can actually work harder. You think you're working at your limits because your brain is fooling you. You're just tired and your brain's like, we're killing it. You're not killing it. You can actually be fresher. You can come home and have more energy for your family. On the weekends, you won't be a zombie. What I'm telling you is actually can work harder and be fresher. That really is the recipe for how we get world champions to the world championship. Whoever does the most work and is the freshest wins. So we really are looking like, hey, the stress is going to come. I might not be able to manage that, but I can manage my adaptation to that. So when we're talking about all of these things, the most important filter again is when and where am I going to do this? So I'm a huge fan clearly of mobilizing, right? Of taking care of my tissues. That's what my whole life is about. I'm brought in sometimes to help untangle complex movement pain problems. We find that most people have time in the evening when laptop is closed, family is in sleep, we're watching some TV, we're chilling out. You're already sitting on the floor. Let's do 10 minutes of soft tissue mobilization at that time. So if you have a ball and a roller, put it right next to your couch. So my doctoral work, looking at barriers to adherence. What keeps people from doing what they need to do? Well, it turns out if I put another step, if I put that roller in the garage, you're not going to go there. If I put it right next to the couch, you're sitting on the ground and you're like, oh, got to do my 10 minutes. It's right there. And so suddenly now I've got you spending 10 minutes and you start to think, what's sore? What's achy? What hurt during my workout? What was barking at me? And if I do 5 minutes on the left side and 5 minutes on the right side, lo and behold, over the course of 5 to 7 days, that's an hour of soft tissue work. That's a freakish amount. And what you'll find is that you don't just do 10 minutes, you do 12 or 15 minutes. But if I say do 15 minutes, you won't do it. If I say you got 10 minutes, you cannot lie. You cannot bullshit me. I know you got 10 minutes. You'll also find you start to create a routine. You're sitting on the floor, you put in the soft tissue work, then you go to bed, and your brain starts to recognize that pattern. You're doing this, then you do this, then this, just like a little child going to bed. First, we take a bath, then we read a book, then you go to bed. Bath, book, bed, bath, book, bed. Well, not only that, but the soft tissue work you're engaging in actually has a huge parasympathetic dump. So it causes you to relax. You never had a massage at a spa and got up and tried to fight someone. You never did that. No boxer lays on the ground and massages themselves and gets in the ring. They would die. So look at how what's happening here is that's a perfect place to help shift out of that big drive, which is what we need to get through the day, huge drive. We also need a big set of breaks. And it turns out that soft tissue work's a big set of breaks. Should you drink some water? Sure. I find I'm engaged. I came through my sort of breath practice, like my senseis. It's Wim Hof and Laird Hamilton and Brian McKenzie, then me. So that's my place. Am I a huge fan of Oxygen Advantage and James Nestor? Absolutely. Do you like Butraco? Super cool. It doesn't matter who you're following. Vanessa Branich, super cool. The thing that you need to do is figure out, where am I going to do this breath practice? And for me, the morning, I'm responsible for breakfast and getting my kids out the door. My CEO wife needs to train in the morning. I do these other things. I don't have time for that. But on big days where I'm going to go, I'll do a 10-minute breath practice beforehand, or during my warm up on the bike or walking, I'll start adding in these breath holds. So if I find I have some timing, I can be dropping in, because I think one of the side effects of the fitness complex is that we've told everyone all of this has to happen in these huge, discrete chunks of time, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. I don't have that. And more importantly, what am I going to give up to do that thing? But if I can get you starting to stack these behaviors into interesting times of your life, suddenly you can get a 2-minute, 3-minute, 4-minute intervention that really starts to aggregate. And we always teach everyone we work with how to do basic breath work while they're mobilizing. So I have another opportunity to do breath. So suddenly it's not like I've had to do this really discrete time. I'm finding out where the places are. You might have a little time in the morning, perfect time to engage in 10 minutes of breathing, maybe sit on the floor. We have something that we've been doing for 10 years called the hip spin up. If you Google Kelly Starrett hip spin up, I'll show you what a quick 10-minute hip opener routine looks like. And what's cool about that, we teach it to all our athletes. And lo and behold, later on, when it's time to go, you're much better prepared. You've done some breathing, you're fueled, you've been moving around. That means when it's time to get into your workout, you can do that quickly.
What do you think about sitting and standing at a desk?
Sitting got a bad rap, and I'm sure we confuse some of that. What we want people to say is not sitting is bad, standing is good. I want people to understand that moving is better, and which environment setup gives me the most option to move. So right now I'm coming to you from a standing desk, but I'm perching on a stool. And so I've got my feet on the floor, and now I'm going to put one leg up on the stool, but I've got my feet on the floor and I'm engaged in active sitting. So ultimately, what we know is that the goal here is try to limit marathon bouts of sitting and to eliminate all these times where my body doesn't be active. So the goal is not to have this heroic bout of exercise and then be sedentary for 23 hours. Yeah. The goal is to continuously move and then go train when I have the opportunity to train. So sitting, my body falls below 1.5 metabolic equivalents, which is the cutoff, the definition of sedentary behavior or not, defined by Harvard. We're trying to limit total sitting time throughout the whole day to 6 hours. So imagine every hour is a cookie. I want you to eat less than 6 cookies a day. And what we find then is, man, I have a whole lot of different ways. Perching the way I am now, like it would be on a bar stool at a bar, is not sitting. With your feet on the ground, you're no longer sitting. So if I think about my environment in terms of not having to make another decision, and I organize myself to give myself choice, then I can stand a little bit. I can perch a little bit. When I'm tired because I'm smoked or I need to do some deep work, I'll sit. Now I'm sitting, but I'm in a different position because I'm on a bar stool. And now I'm making my environment work for me, right? And if I've got something I can stand on that's squishy or has knobs, I can massage my feet. I can get a ton of movement in while I'm doing something else. Treadmill disc is super cool, may not scale. You may make you look like a pariah unless you work for yourself and you're the CEO, right? Mm-hmm. Bike desk, also super weird to sweat all day long on the bike. Doesn't scale. And if you own a business, I don't want you to have to buy 500 bikes for your employees. But man, set that desk height, and all of a sudden we're getting more movement in. And what you'll find is that there's a session cost to sitting. The problem is, we've always said, limit your sitting because it'll cause cancer, right? Your body will explode. I want everyone to understand the sedentary physiology is very clear, but sitting doesn't necessarily cause back pain. It turns out sitting and certain postures that we adopt when we sit incur a session cost that may limit my choices later on. Like, I like to swim. Well, you're not going to put your arms over your head if you're in a C shape. Hey, I like to run. Cool, but you don't extend your hip anymore because you're in hip flexion all day long. So we'll start to see that a lot of the choices that we make during the day influence our movement capacities later on.
I recently did a hot yoga session, Kelly, and when I left, I've not done that a lot. When I left, I felt like I was the most flexible human on the planet.
Weird,
I don't
huh?
I don't know if I've ever felt that flexible in my life. I
Yeah.
sweat a ton and I felt pretty good. I mean, I stretch a lot, but what about hot yoga and making
Great.
that a regular part of your practice?
How many times a week we're talking about? You going three times a week?
Well, I just did literally one session with a
So
group, like a leadership
you
group.
see what happened was
Yeah,
that's a sport. That's
yeah,
a leisure activity.
yeah,
So what are you going to give up to go to hot yoga? What's the
yeah,
minimum dose for me to go to hot yoga to solve all my movement problems?
yeah,
Do I think yoga is the shiz? 100%.
yeah,
And if you come in with a movement language and you really look at what yoga is doing, it's brilliant. You're standing on one leg. I'm forcing you to breathe in end range positions. I'm asking you to turn your trunk and rotate. I'm asking you to expose yourself to positions that are native to the human. If your program is good, you should be able to go over to a yoga class and thrive. I didn't say be the best yogi. I'm 240 pounds. I'm almost 6'2". I'm a tank. I still kick ass in yoga. That's because I can use yoga as my third party validation to what my
yeah,
practices look like, right? I sit on the ground and oftentimes I sauna. That's my secret jam. I love the sauna. I understand I'm very lucky. But when I go to hot yoga class, the yogis come up to me and they're like, dude, we've never seen hippos and rhinos move like this. Like, what are you a yogi? And I'm like, I'm not a yogi. I just mobilize, lift weights with full range of motion, get hot, and have a breath practice. Oh, that's yoga. So really what we're trying to do is say, hey, where can we strip out these essentials, these foundations, these first principles, which are neatly tied up in yoga, and then put them into my day-to-day life so I have more exposure. That's great. And if you love yoga, keep doing it. You still need to swing a kettlebell eventually, et cetera, et cetera. But lo and behold, you're going to expose yourself to a lot of shapes and positions, which then can translate over to the things you care about. I think it's great.
yeah. Kelly, I know we're right at time. This is awesome. Man, I really appreciate how much care and thought you put into this. The book is called Built to Move, the 10 Essential Habits to Help You Move Freely and Live Fully. And I've said this before. I know this is a leadership podcast and we talk about concepts, but if we don't take care of the most important thing in the world, which is our own bodies, then nothing else matters. How do you, right? What's the Confucius quote? A healthy man wants everything. A sick man wants one thing. And so to me, it's like I'm trying to do whatever I can to give myself the best odds to have my body be in the proper shape so that I can lead effectively, my family first and foremost,
Yes.
and then everybody I'm working with. But if I don't take care of the number one thing, right, my body, then all that other stuff is gone. It doesn't matter. It doesn't even exist because I won't exist. And so I think that's why you can't overemphasize this stuff enough, because it's the most important thing. Is we got to take care of our bodies. We got to do whatever we can to give ourselves the best chance for our bodies to work effectively. And so I think your work is just right on, man. It's like right in line with that. This book is just another example of you putting it out in the world. So thank you so much, man.
My pleasure. We think everyone should easily get a 10 out of 10. We have 10 vital signs, reference points, benchmarks. 10 out of 10. It's an easy way to sort of understand how you're doing. And we want to bring in blind spots. Remember I said intense curiosity? Intense curiosity is about, hey, I didn't realize that was important. And I gave it a try. I tested it and I was like, holy crap, how do we illuminate blind spots? This is not basic low-level stuff. We give the same program to our lead athletes to make sure that we don't miss steps. And then we start to build complexity on top of it. We've got a 21-day video companion guide at builttomove.com so that you can bring it with your friends. You can create a book club. You can hand it to your employees. We understand that everyone is thinking critically about this, but we've got to help people reimagine what their behaviors look like in their homes and start to wrap our arms around and bring everyone along. Otherwise, we're going to start to see a bigger and bigger divide where we see fit care, where I'm doing 5 colonoscopies a week when I'm getting my blood panel and and then we have really sick care, but we're not reaching the middle. So let's go ahead and make sure that we're doing first principles. And if you're listening to this and you have kids, 100% of what I said today applies to your kids, and you're not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks again, man. I love the book, love your work, and I would love to continue our dialogue as we both progress.
Anytime. My
Awesome.
pleasure.